This episode of Around the Layout is brought to you by my book, Design It, Build It, Burn It. If you're looking to spend hours designing a layout, followed by weeks of track laying and scenery, only to have a deep desire to watch it go up in flames, my book, Design It, Build It, Burn It, is for you. In each chapter, I'll share with you my approach to make each layout I craft as flammable as possible. The book also includes 50 blank pages to use as fire starter. Pick up your copy of Design It, Build It, Burn It at fine hobby shops everywhere.
Discover prototypical track and turnouts with the Roadmaster series from Oak Hill Model Railroad Track Supply. Proudly made in the United States, Oak Hill's handcrafted turnouts provide unparalleled detail and accuracy, giving your layout museum-quality track work at an affordable price. Whether fully built or in easy-to-assemble kit form, Roadmaster provides all the details of real track. Looking for a custom piece of track work? Oak Hill can help with custom turnouts, diamonds, crossings, and more. Check out all of their offerings on their website, ohrtracksupply.com. If you're looking to bring more realism to your layout industries, look no further than tullymodels.com, the home of Southern Tier Grain Modeler Supply and Steel Mill Modeler Supply. With models to fit steam, transition, and diesel eras, Kevin Tully has you covered with all of the components you'll need to take your grain and steel mills to the next level. Check out the entire catalog at tullymodels.com. ATLP Extra is our monthly newsletter delivered right to your inbox each month. Sign up for free at atlpextra.com.
ATLP Rewind.
Well, hello, everyone. Welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. I'm Joe Mammay, and today we are happy to bring you our very special guest, Ray Arnott. Ray, welcome to the show.
Joe, so great to be here. Appreciate you having me on the show.
Absolutely, Ray. You've been on my list of people I've been wanting to get on the show. And I guess without further ado, let's get right into it, Ray.
Absolutely.
What is it about trains for Ray Arnott?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think that's a question that's asked to a lot of model railroaders, isn't it? Like what got us into trains in general and what's our appeal?
Yeah.
I'm not sure what really started. I know when I was probably before I was born, my dad bought me a TYCO Chattanooga choo-choo. And, you know, I grew up, you know, with a HO model railroad. I grew up in the town of Baltic, and it was well after they had closed what is now the Willimantic branch, the line that goes between Willimantic, Connecticut and Plainfield, Connecticut. So I didn't see a lot of real prototype growing up. And then we moved to the town of Scotland, where there wasn't really any railroading at all. But I'm not sure what exactly brought me into, you know, the appeal to it. I just know that, you know, I had toy trains when I was growing up. We never really got to set them up because there really wasn't a whole lot of room for it. But I don't know. I think there's just a human appeal to railroading, and I think there's something to it, but I certainly don't know the answer to it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something about these large steel beasts moving on steel rail, and it sounds like the seed was planted early, you know, from your dad buying you the Chattanooga choo-choo train set. And I'm sure when you're out and about driving as a kid, you saw railroad tracks, and it kind of fostered the interest a little bit.
I was always looking, you know, and I guess maybe when I was a little bit older, my mom worked at a store, Benny's, pretty popular amongst those that live in southern New England will remember Benny's, a hardware store, kind of hardware, auto, home store. It was Walmart before Walmart. And but anyway, they had a location in Norwich, Connecticut, right along the central Vermont. And I do remember as a kid, the building was so close to the tracks that when CV would go by, it would shake the building. And if we were there as kids with my mom, you know, I'd hear that and then maybe get downstairs because her office was upstairs with no windows, and maybe just catch a glimpse of green and yellow going by. And I didn't understand the operations. I certainly didn't understand anything at all about it. But yeah, early on, there's just something about it. I think maybe the size, the power, the rareness, maybe the fact that it's like like kind of catching something. It doesn't, you know, especially if you're on a line like that that's not overly active with a whole lot of trains. It's kind of a thrill to see something there.
Yeah, absolutely. That sounds like exactly like you said, where it's the rareness where you know they're there, and I'm sure you know that they go through there. It's a matter of when and if, and just happen to be there. And when you catch one going through, that's definitely a treat and definitely gets the adrenaline going at a young age.
Yeah, for sure. And I can also say, like in Baltic, you know, we would go where that line was, where I grew up when, again, we moved to Scotland in 1985. But every time we go over that track, and I knew, I guess, that there was no trains coming, and eventually they put the exempt signs up at the crossing, which is always a bad sign, you know, nothing's coming. But I would always look left and right, you know, just hoping to see something. And, you know, it was so thrilling. You know, the kid in me was so happy when they actually reactivated that line I think it was in the 2004, 5, 6, somewhere around there. They reactivated that line. And to get to see trains going by the old Western Grain, there was a Blue Seal dealer in this real small white depot type building that was right next to that line. And just to see pictures of the train going by that again, it was just really cool to, you know, kind of fulfilled that childhood fantasy of seeing that train.
Yeah, it sounds like with a line being revitalized, kind of revitalized something in you, an interest.
Yeah, and, you know, that was right around the time I started finding interest in trains again. And, you know, through my childhood, again, we didn't have really a big space in our house. We lived in a 1930s built Cape, and there just wasn't a spot for HO. And of course, we didn't understand it either. We thought, you know, the only end goal of model railroading was to build a 4x8 and run it around in a circle. We weren't exposed to that, and we were prior to the internet and all that great information that we have now. And then my dad took an attempt to get me into N scale, because we could maybe get some N scale stuff going.
Yeah.
So in the corner of my bedroom, there was like this, you know, cutout for the dormer that was in the front of the house. And it was about the right place to put, I don't know if it was 6 or 8, but probably it was like 6 feet by 2 or 3 feet. He put a piece of plywood in there, and we attempted to model an N scale layout, but we attempted this hill climb and then back down, but we didn't understand, you know, grades and how to do that. So it never got completed. And of course, by that time, you know, I was hitting that age where sports became more important, and hockey bit me. And, you know, I started getting into roller hockey and doing those things with my cousins, and then eventually on teams. And that really led up into my 20s. And that's when, you know, after that era, that's when really railroading and then model railroading came back into my life.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So it sounds like that once you got a little bit revitalized in railroading, building that small N scale layout to fit the available room you had, would that say that kind of carried a little bit of itch?
Yeah. I always wanted to see it. I just didn't know how. I guess maybe the how to do it really was kind of left in the air. I wanted to model railroad, and I certainly, anytime I saw somebody with any model railroading, which was very limited, I was certainly interested and certainly, you know, intrigued by it. But no, it really for me, in where my real railroading and model railroading and everything else that comes with that really started was actually when I was 25 years old. I was working at Nutmeg International Trucks in Franklin, and right along the CV, back to the same line I was talking about earlier with going by Benny's, but a little bit north of that, I would come out of work, and right along the tracks would be the blue and gold of the New England Central. Their fleet of GP38s. This is prior to all this stuff that's going on now. They were all painted the same color, and just they'd run a consist of like 5 or 6 or more of these GP38s.
Wow. And
it was like, and they were down there switching out K&L feed, which is no longer in service, and Cough, which is now like part of Land O'Lakes, but still receiving carloads of grain for the egg farm. But yeah, they would be switching both of those out with monster trains. They would do interchange with P&W down in, the New London yard, and they'd bring stuff over there. It was just really a kind of cool time for me to get involved. I mean, I think I missed, I'm going off a little tangent here. I think I missed like the golden era of railroading. Like, I see so many people like, have captured like the Conrail era and then really captured the Central Vermont era. And I was a little late to the game with the P&W and the NECR and seeing those in their heyday. It just, I feel like I kind of missed it. But then again, I think if you talk to the person that was watching that era, they probably say they missed the grand era of the New Haven or the Penn Central, or, that they think it's when they saw the Big Blue come out on, from Conrail, they thought that was a disaster. Like we think that candy corn is now from the G&W. So yeah, it's hard. It's like, you got to really lock yourself into, that mentality that, your era is going to be great to somebody else down the line. But I'm glad I was able to, and I only had a little point and shoot camera, but I do have some photos of the NECR in Franklin doing that switching. And, that's really where it started to kind of fester in me, the idea of railroading and then eventually model railroading.
Yeah. Okay. So it sounds like you were kind of exposed to operations right outside where you work. You got to see the 4 or 5 GP38s of the New England Central doing their thing, long cuts of cars, and that kind of maybe sparked a little bit of interest for operations.
It's funny because I was exposed to it, but it didn't click.
Okay.
I came watching New England Central, and then that's became my habit of lunchtime. Go down, see if they're in Franklin, see if they're climbing back up the hill, because that's a really cool climb. When you come out of Franklin, like you're heading back to Windham, you're going up the hills there, and it's a pretty hard pull. So you can hear them for quite a while up in Notch 8 pulling that hill. So I would go up there and maybe watch them go by, and then it interested me again back in model railroading because I started searching, now we've got the internet, I can bang around and get information. So I search out New England Central, and lo and behold, Atlas did a run of New England Centrals in GP38 paint. So I said, okay, that's, that's cool. I'm going to, eventually saved up, and I bought a couple of them. I had no idea about DCC. I was just thinking that DC is the only world. And then I happened to wander into a hobby shop, and I'm not even sure how I connected with it, but I walk in and I'm asking them about this DCC thing, and they turn me on to the NCE power cab, the same one I have today. So, and then they, talk about the coders and start understanding that. But going back to your question about operations, I was heading back towards and built another 4x8 oval layout, which there's nothing wrong with. Listen, anybody, that listens to your show here that thinks that, if there's anything wrong with 4x8, there isn't. But the operations thing didn't really click, although I did buy a grain mill to put on that 4x8, and I did put a siding so I could, put cars there, but I never really thought about the operations thing. That came much later. Okay. But again, then I was bit, and I'm trying to piece together 2005. I really didn't have a whole lot of guidance. 6, 7. That's about the time I moved out of my apartment. And then, the 4x8 kind of went aside, and I kind of parked it again. And then, really, so there's been like 3 eras of Ray Arnott's model railroading story. There's like the kid with the Chattanooga choo-choo and the N scale, to the 4x8 with just the New England Central, and then eventually getting back into it really within the last, I don't know, time's clicking by here, but the last 5 or so years of being back in the hobby.
Okay. Yeah. So that's a pretty interesting timeline. I really like how you went into detail there with the 3 different layers. And so we've talked about the first 2 layers. Let's talk about this 3rd layer. It sounds like after you moved out of your apartment and you moved into a new place, was something reignite the flame for you for trains, or?
Well, in '07, I moved out of my apartment and I moved into a temporary space. And then I moved back to that same apartment, which is kind of just an odd thing. But I ended up back in the same apartment, and I don't really recall doing a whole lot of that. I was single at the time. I was still interested in the hobby. I certainly loved trains and loved seeing trains. I actually started doing more rail fanning about that time. I'll tell you, rail fanning was such huge therapy for me when in '07, I divorced and it was going through a tough time. And I spent a lot of time. I actually pulled a camper out to Selkirk, New York, and stayed in a campground near Selkirk. And I spent like 3 days, pulled up a lawn chair right alongside in Voorheesville, New York. There's a diner right across the street. That's the west side of the Selkirk yard. Everything going west is coming that way. And I would just get up there just before sunrise and just watch the parade coming out of Selkirk back in the, the pre-PSR days of CSX. And yeah, it was just like a super highway of trains, and it was so wild, especially coming from, my background where I didn't really see much trains. And then you see, some short lines and regionals around here that, that operate maybe daily, but you see it once or twice go down the line to this whole massive super highway of trains. And it really was eye opening. And more importantly for me at that time, just therapeutic. I could just go up there, take my mind off of all the stresses that I was going through, and just watch trains. And it really, really helped. So, and then back to, I don't recall doing a whole lot of model railroading after '07 up until I moved to my home and, that I'm in now. And I met my wife now, and, we bought this house. And then I think it was probably a year or two after I kind of, we were moving boxes around downstairs, and I had all my train stuff in it, and seeing it again kind of relight the itch a little bit. I pulled some of the locomotives out that I was starting to do some DCC work and re-decaling, and I pulled them up on a table and I started messing around with that a little bit. When I was looking at houses, I knew that I wanted to build a model railroad in it. So I was always, the shopping list was like, I have to have something where I can put my model railroad in the basement. And every time we go to one house, and they're like, they'd say, oh, I said, where's the basement? And they'd be like, they pull up some kind of crawl space thing. And I'd be like, nope, this is not our house. This isn't it. And then, the few of them I'd go down, the basement would be like dungy, or, I'd have to duck to walk around. I immediately left. I mean, Katrina might've liked the kitchen, but it didn't matter. The basement was terrible. So we're out of here. And then we eventually found this home, and to be honest, the first thing I looked was the basement. And I said, okay, this is a suitable basement. And I'm thinking, I'm going to build a big railroad empire around this whole thing. Now I've got the idea in my head that you can do that, right? And it may have been it probably was a link from the firehouse to Mark Herrick, who was in the adjoining fire department.
Okay.
Although I never talked to Mark about it, we knew of each other. Our departments would go to mutual calls, but you don't have that conversation on a fire scene, by the way. It's just like, oh, by the way, are you in model trains and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't happen. But through a mutual friend or one of Mark's colleagues or fellow volunteers at Wyndham Center, he mentioned Don Iris. So I went on the web and look up Don Iris, and there's this video, to which I know you love the soundtrack to that video. So
yes.
So
nothing like banjo music and model railroading. That's what does it for me.
Oh yeah. It's perfect. So, I watched that and I'm like, oh, and then the guy was telling me, he's like, you should get over there sometime and see that layout. It's huge. And it goes around this entire basement, and they run it like a real railroad. And even then it didn't really click to me like operations, but I go and I watch that video. If he's got 100,000 likes, maybe 50,000 are me watching that video over and over. It was really fascinating to me that a guy could build that and have, that much, that much running on it.
Yeah.
So, but it never really tied together. I still, in my head figured that it just ran around in a loop. I didn't think of, okay, you're actually running like a real railroad and you're dropping cars off, switching and all that. That didn't really click yet either. It was finally, I was sitting here and I had all this stuff, and the 4x8 did travel with me. I put it on, when I built it, I put it on legs. So I knew I wasn't going to stay in that apartment forever. I put it on 2x4 legs, and I put casters underneath it so I could actually roll it around the basement at the apartment. And I brought it here, and I set it back up, but it became a junk collector. Everything but railroading was going on top of it.
Sure.
And then I think it was one night I was sitting here, in front of the computer, and I started Googling around. I don't know where I got the idea about club, but I found one. I found the Worcester Model Railroaders up in Webster. This is like 2013, 2014, maybe. I was like, yeah, it was right around then, 2014, 2015, somewhere around, maybe it was later than that, but I honestly can't remember at this point anymore. Time's just clicking by. But I look at that and I join, and I go up there and I'm like, wow, okay. And then I start to that's when the operations picture starts to really open up.
Okay. Yep.
Because I meet some really great people. There was Ralph Kimball, many others to which Tom Tellier was one that was really great and helpful. And there's a couple that have now passed, and I apologize for not listing every name out, but it was really great to start meeting people and getting an idea of, what can be done with a railroad. And then really the key element for me in model railroading, the point, that pivot point, right, where it goes from, a gradual climb to a almost like a lift off, was meeting Mike Du Bois. Okay. And that's where I met Mike, was at the Worcester Club, and Mike and I hit it off very quickly. And I knew that, within a few weeks, he was going to be a lifelong friend, because our humor was the same. Our outlook was the same. But more importantly, our geekiness for the railroads were the same. Like the minute details that him and I both paid attention to, and the things that mattered were like the same. And nice. when you find somebody like that in life, where, they make you feel like you're not weird anymore because there's somebody just like you that's equally odd or equally different. Now you don't feel so. Now you've got like people, and him and I just hit it off. But that's where I really started to get my mind open to operations. So Mike kind of led me in with Ken Geekus, the president of the club. And I had my the first time I actually did train operations was through that club at Ken Geekus's layout. He models the Union Pacific. And I worked with Kyle LeBlanc, who we both know now. And that's where I met Kyle LeBlanc. And Kyle, I was like, I had no idea what to do. Like, I don't know, a switch list. What's this? It's just a bunch of car numbers written down. I don't know what to do with this. And yeah. Okay, so what are we going to do again? So he says, well, listen, he goes, we'll do a 2-man crew. I'll work with you, and we'll do this. So I learned a lot, and I still use a lot of the stuff I learned even in that first operating session about, theory of switching and the things I do. And sometimes they work, sometimes they don't, but, pulling empties first, getting them. And then, there's a lot of things that I learned from Kyle right in that first operating session. And then I was hooked. I really was. I was like, it's purpose, right? It's, it's not just watching the train go around. And again, if there's people that like that, and I do too. I mean, listen, I'll rail fan, on a model railroad too, and watch trains go around and see them. But it was like next level, right? It was just that pivot point of, now I really have got to do this. But then, it still didn't click until Mike smacked me on the back of the head. as I'm telling him, I'm like, oh, Mike, I can't wait. I'm going to really drill down now, and I'm going to get back on my 4x8 and get that finished. He was like, no, Ray, stop. You don't need to build your 4x8. Listen, build yourself a small switching layout.
Okay.
So now I'm starting to get the idea. So he's like, come over to my house. So he brings me over. Mike had a great little layout. Providence of Worcester in the 1970s. It wasn't huge, but it was double decked in half of his basement with a helix. And I was like, this is really cool. But he says, you don't have to build it all that big. He goes, just take this one section of my layout. And he showed me, he was like, a couple industries here, switching operations. Mike was big into switching, as he would say, switching. So I was that was it. Like, okay. Unfortunately, Mike wasn't in the best of health, and we watched him decline, and Mike's no longer with us. He passed away a couple of years ago. But when I started, when this whole idea switched, it's like, well, come over and give me a hand. And he wasn't healthy enough to do it at that time. So he would come over and we'd spend, a few hours each time he'd come over. I built the bench work. I said, so we settled on 2x10, and I'm not sure why we did 10 feet instead of 8, but I'm glad it did because it worked out.
Yeah.
So we built this. I built a 2x10 bench, took the 4x8 and ripped it in half. Right. So I'm reusing some of the materials off the 4x8, rip it in half. And I set up the bench, and he comes over and he helps lay some of the track work. And as he's sitting there and he's going like this, and he's and I'm talking about, what I'd love to do in the future. And kind of the idea was, well, we'll build a switching layout. And if you ever build a bigger layout, you can just incorporate this into your next layout.
Okay.
And be a section of it. But then he's sitting there and he's putting all this track down, and he looks over to the left, and I've got some space in the wall. And he goes, if you wanted a yard, he goes, you could just build another bench right over there, or a shelf, and you'd put your staging yard over there. I was like, yeah, I probably could. So he goes, and then within the week, but in between him there, I built a 2x6 bench, and I put it over there. And I said, this is going to be my yard. And he goes, well, this is more than what you need. And I said, well, what do you, and we eventually figured on the idea of, we'll make it a yard, but we'll also put a couple industries on the back side of it for, just to give more switching opportunities. Again, listen, Mike was like switching, everything's switching. And he was right. And I'm glad he led me down that path. You don't need a whole lot of running if you're doing, these type industries. So we get this thing all set up, and then we got to figure out, okay, now we got to get the train from the 6-foot bench to the 10-foot bench. So, and right in that area is my electrical panel.
Okay. Yeah. Yep.
So now I can't block my electrical panel. I know the rules. So I got to figure out a way to get trains to go by without blocking my electrical panel. So I built this lift out section that doesn't really lift out. It stays there. I can get to my electrical panel very easily. I can walk up to it, reach up, open the door, flip breakers. If there needed to be any major work where they needed to completely access the electrical panel, I could take the lift out, and then they could go between the benches. Although not ideal, and certainly nothing I want to actually have to do.
Right.
But I put that in place, and then, with Mike's suggestion, we made a tunnel there through a mountain so that the train would kind of disappear around it. It's a tough curve. It's 18 and just 18. Okay. So it wasn't exactly, thought out perfectly, but the train does go through there. It limits me a little bit on cars, but not terribly.
Okay.
But now I've got a connection. So now I've got, this idea of growing, and one of the things that's key in remembering when I tell people about my railroad, and they'll ask me why I made decisions that I did, and, like having it with the lift out and such a tight radius, and, how it all came together. And a lot of it was involuntarily rushed because of Mike's condition.
Okay. Yeah.
And I wanted to build a railroad with Mike, and knowing that we were going to lose Mike was like, it was the big rush let's get this thing done before, and so that Mike can see it. And one of the blessings that I have in my life, not only knowing Mike and, the friendship him and I shared, was the fact that he not only was able to design it, but he actually got to run it and operate on it. It wasn't fully scenic. It's still not fully scenic, but he got to run trains on it. And that was just like a huge accomplishment in my life. Hey, I built a railroad with Mike Du Bois, my very good friend. And now I have that memory of him on that railroad, of us working together, the laughs that we shared. Boy, we had some laughs, and he just, the stuff that he would come out with, and his humor and his outlook on things. And even with him in the condition he was, where he could only work for a few hours, he'd get extremely exhausted, but he wanted to be over here, and he was my motivator. He was like, I'm coming over. We're going to work on the layout. I'd be like, okay, he would push. He was like, and then he would be like checking in on me during the week. Like, hey, did you get this done? Did you get that done? So he was the boss, and it was my railroad, but he was the boss. He was really good at letting me make my own decisions about the railroad, but he moved it along. He was a great motivator.
Yeah. So that's quite a story, Ray. It sounds like what started off as like a friendship in the club, being introduced to Mike, you hit it off right off the bat because you both had similar interests, similar senses of humor, and you each had the same interest in the same area of the hobby. And it sounds like from that point, he took you under his wing and was your mentor.
Yeah, he is the mentor. That he loved that title, and kind of the ties. So I mentioned Kyle LeBlanc earlier. Kyle's father, Ron, was Mike's mentor. So it was like, Mike always loved that title, that theory of mentorship, and I know he got it from Ron, and Ron and Mike were really good friends. Unfortunately, I never got to meet Ron before he passed, and then I think Mike just kind of felt it as like, pay it forward kind of thing too. And when he had the opportunity, and I think that's what he saw in me, was an opportunity to pay it forward with the mentorship thing. And I really wanted to listen to Mike and hear his theories. And we would spend so much time, whether we were working on layouts or over at his place or at the club, and on the phone. Boy, we talked it up on the phone probably every day. There'd be a call from Mike, and we'd be talking about pretty much anything and everything that was, and there was life stuff in there too that was really good too. He'd talk about his kids and his wife, and some of the things that he had done in life. And, it just became this, and I think it does, I know friendships like the ones we have and the ones that we have in the tri-state group, they start to transcend the model railroading thing, and it just becomes this bond. And, model railroading is like the center of it. But in reality, we're all humans, and we're all, we have lives, and we start to share them with each other. And it just becomes this really unique, brother and sisterhood that starts to develop amongst people that start to really spend time with each other in the hobby.
Yeah. I couldn't have said it better myself. You nailed it right there. Like some of the friendships that I've formed from model railroading and in the tri-state group, and it surpasses just the trains. It goes far beyond the trains. Like, we've all grown super close the past few years, especially with COVID and running like some of the Zoom meetings, instead of being able to operate, it really kind of solidified the bond that we all had. And a lot of the times, we talk about trains during the op sessions, but a lot of times it's joking with each other, giving each other a hard time. And one of the things that's so great about this hobby. So great.
I'm sure you feel the same. Model railroading becomes a an escape from the real world, right? It's a 187th world that we create, or whatever scale you're in, right? I don't want to leave the S scalers at 164th, whichever way you want to, right? Whichever scale, it's your miniature world that you get to control. And all the stressors of life, whether it be, fights with a spouse or job troubles or anything else, you get to go down there and escape into a different world. And I think that's a very appealing part of model railroading. It's the things things that you can't control in the real world, you can control on your miniature world. But in that, when you start to share it out with other people and you bring them into that world, then you somehow, you spend enough time, you become bonded enough where the real world stuff starts to come up in conversation, and you know why you're there, and you know why they're there, and it's not always bad, but it's just it's a phenomenal de-stressor. It really is, because, and if it's not for you, you got to relook at it, because it should be, in my opinion, it should be a de-stressor. There's challenges to it. There's things that don't always come out right. Track doesn't always get laid the right way. Sometimes you have electrical problems. Sometimes you can't figure out scenery. Sometimes but they're all in miniature where you can control their outcome and you can change them on your own power, kind of thing. In the real world, that's not always the case. There's a lot of other elements and factors, and you're relying on other people, or, things not down there, not on your layout. So I think that's a huge part of it. Maybe back to your very first question you asked here on the show, and maybe that's kind of the appeal of model railroading too, is it really is an escape from the real world.
Absolutely. It truly is. It's one of the great things about the hobby. After a long day, you can just head down to the layout, and if you're at the point where you got trains running, you can fire up a train, let it run, and it gets even better, in my opinion, when you combine some friendships and you have a few people over, which kind of leads into the next part I want to talk about. So you have this layout, you and your mentor, Mike, you built this layout, this switching layout. Then what happened?
I guess what the next key piece would be for me would be meeting and being a part of the tri-state group. That's another. So now we're really going on a climb, right? We're going from kind of flat to climbing really steeply with Mike, and then we just kind of turn it, completely vertical here. So Mike knew Don Iris, and I'd seen Don, and I think Don and I had conversed a few times online through Messenger or what have you. But I bought the Walthers ST70M Providence and Worcester 4301, 4302, sitting up on the shelf in my office at home now. But I was having problems with it, and the ditch lights were terrible on it. I think that became one of the big issues with the ditch lights were terrible, and then there was something else, and motor settings, and needed to be reprogrammed. I had no clue about any of that stuff, but Don Iris did. So I'm messaging him back and forth, and he finally says, well, why don't you come over to his house in Scituate, and I'll reprogram it for you. And then, you can get to see the layout, because I've always, I've heard about it, but never had seen it.
Sure.
So I get over there, and holy moly, right? It's just like, wow, this massive layout. So he goes over and he takes it in his back, his back laboratory, and starts to mess around with it and reprogram it and loads a new file into it. Now I understand what he was doing, but back then I just figured he was just kind of putting some voodoo magic into the thing or whatever. But I'm walking around, I'm like just overwhelmed, jaws dragging on the ground, and I'm like, wow, this is amazing, and this and that. But the first question, I always remember the very first question I asked Don about his layout. It wasn't anything technical. It wasn't a scenery question. It wasn't bench work. It wasn't anything. It was a political question. It was, how did you get your wife to approve you using so much room. And then he gave me his backstory, and it made it more clear that, you know, how he was able to claim so much real estate to build this beautiful railroad. And at the end, Don gets the locomotive program. He's showing me a couple of his locomotives and how they perform together. And then when he put 4302, I think he hooked it up to something of his, maybe a couple Jeeps or something. And he showed, you know, consisting a little bit and how they work together. And then at the end, when I'm leaving, I asked the dumb question. I see the railroad sign outside. He had a, you know, railroad sign with working, well, with signals on it. And then, of course, I asked the dumb question, hey, Don, does it work? And, you know, I should have known that an electrician would actually have his lights working. So he flips that on and shows it to me. And then at the end of the conversation, he goes, yep. We're talking about the layout. And he goes, yep. He goes, I love, you know, it's a great layout, but I don't know. The wife's maybe talking about moving to Florida, so we'll have to see what happens and stuff. He goes, but I'll see if I can get you in on an operating session. I said, oh, that's great. Let me know. And then the next thing I see on the internet is a Sawzall being held by Mark Herrick cutting the thing up. And I was like, well, I guess I'm not going to any operating sessions over there. So I always love to joke when Don says that he misses his layout. I tell him I missed it more. I missed the entire thing. You know, it's like, so yeah, so that's, you know, so that's where we kind of tied in with Don. So I got to meet Don, and then I think I just kind of hung around long enough of trying to, with the Mike Du Bois connection and talking with Don, and Don finally said, hey, you know, we're probably a guy short over at Mark Herrick's or Joe Grissetti's. Yep. So I think my first operations with the Tri-State Group was at Joe Grissetti's New York Central. And I was nervous as heck because I don't know if you know this, but Don's got a reputation for being maybe a little tough.
Really?
Yeah. So
I found that pretty interesting. Usually he's super easy and supportive, and he gently tells you things and how you should make some changes.
I question your observations, but anyway, Don's a great guy.
He is.
And, but I was nervous because I never operated, I guess, at that level before, right? In my head. Like,
sure.
Yeah. Okay. I've done Ken Geekis's, but that was pretty laid back, but I've heard, you know, these can be pretty serious and pretty in-depth op sessions, but I think I was given a couple through trains, which is the right way. If you have a big operating layout, just give a guy a couple through trains and let him get used to the layout and running through and dispatching. But I'm seeing all this stuff, right? They've got the Joe Grissetti's had CTC on it, and there was a dispatcher in the other room, and yeah, I'm running trains, and that's where I finally started to click in. And then I saw Mark Herrick's layout, and I was, oh my God, this is another beautiful layout and a massive, you know, railroad empire that he's got over there with the BNSF Montana division. And then Don moves to Florida. Finally, you know, he took the layout down, then he moved to Florida, and I guess I kind of slid in that opening of that monthly turn, and I couldn't wait. I know I was like, we were going to Grissetti's. It took me a long while to get over to Mike King's. I think I was invited, but for some reason it took a long while, and got into Mike King's layout and saw his. And I think Mike and I are more comparable to, you know, when we talk about size and stuff. Mike and I have a little more connected, and that's, you know, we've had that conversation before about, you know, being the smaller layout, but the things that we can do to keep operators entertained. And, you know, from that, then I start adding, you know, getting my layout closer to operations, and finally kicked that off. And then eventually got into the rotation, and, you know, now, you know, feeling a regular part of the Tri-State Group, and inviting some other new people. But the Tri-State Group really was, like I said, the pivot point that just takes the thing vertical, and everything I've done past that point has really been, you know, it's Tri-State Group. It really is the Tri-State Railroaders. Just the support, the cool people I met, such as yourself. And there's something very special about the Tri-State Railroaders.
Agree.
And I think the real special part of it, I look at Mark and Don and those guys as really the start of all this, obviously. But the super cool thing about the Tri-State Railroaders is there's no one kingpin boss.
Yep.
It's the boss of the Tri-State Railroaders is whoever's operating that week.
Yeah.
That's it. And then once your week's up, then it's passed, and it's passed so well to the next guy, and agreeability. We all have the same kind of philosophy of model railroading. We all see it very similar. We don't take it overly serious, but we do try to make a true simulation of as much as we possibly can. But if a guy makes a mistake, we're not browbeating him, and we're not throwing him out the door. Sure. We work with people, and I'd be remiss to not mention Tony Donatelli, because the friendship I've made with Tony too has just been, it's been great. And Tony and I share a similar sense of humor, and boy, does he like to rib I'm meeting Tony and being involved with his layout. And as I built more skills, as I learned from Don, and Don taught me more about programming decoders, and I got more into ESU and low programmer. And Don was I don't know, I wouldn't say 24-hour support, but I wouldn't call him in the middle of the night. But boy, we'd stay up late at night, working through issues and problems, and teaching me and reteaching me. And as he learned new things, he'd share it. And that goes for everybody. And that's so cool. Like, you're a great scenery guy. You love sharing your talents, and Mark's a great scenery guy, and Don's a great electrical guy and operations guy, and Mike King, his ability to do 3D stuff, and his technology side with Arduinos and Raspberry Pi and all that kind of stuff. And I love graphics and graphic design and making signs and taking photos and backdrop stuff. And we've got a nice equal share of just a whole pool of talents within the Tri-State, and we're all just willing to share it with each other. Yeah. And, then it comes with tools, it comes with supply, it comes with a whole world of things that we just, it's like a club without the politics of a club is the way I describe it at times. It's just such a blessing to be a part of.
Yeah, it definitely is. I'm very thankful myself to be part of the club. It's, well, not club, but part of the group, I should say. But like you said, everybody kind of brings their own thing and own interest areas, and with the same general interest of operations.
You're right.
And that's great. That works for us. That works for our small group. But there's other groups of people out there, other people involved in the hobby whose interest areas might be photographing, mainline running trains, just seeing trains run. And that's the one great thing about our hobby is there's no real set rule. As long as you're enjoying the hobby, that's what it's all about. Having fun, the escapism that we talked about earlier. And I think all of that gets brought to the next level when you meet someone who's like-minded like you.
Yeah. Again, you've nailed it. It's when you put yourself out there in the hobby, and you get out from the basement and you start talking to some people, and you're not afraid to say what you really like about the hobby. If you had a niche thing, like you just like to collect, I don't know, F units or something from New Haven, that you're in the hobby. There's 1,000 points or more of entry into the world of model railroading, whether you're a collector, you're a modeler, directly, if you, or if you're just a rail fan, you're in the club. And, I think rail fanning and railroading, I think what I find is most model railroaders do like rail fanning, but maybe it's not the other way around. Maybe some rail fans don't find model railroading or pull to it.
Yeah.
But it's all in the same. It's what we're doing, at least what we're doing in operations. We'd love to go see the prototype because we want to emulate it.
Absolutely.
And, I find myself rail fanning and doing photography, and it lights it. When I go out, I'll go again, going to the national convention this year in Fort Worth, and I'll be down in that area, BNSF, UP, KCS, maybe the CP now, whatever. I'm going down that area, and you see so much railroading, and then I'm going to be bit. I'm going to be coming back here like, a ball of fire about going to Mark's house, and, he's Montana division, but it's BNSF, and I can't wait to, get put in a holding siding and, with a long train, or, run on his railroad the same way I just saw, they operate in Fort Worth. And I'm going to come back to my layout and incorporate maybe some ideas that I've got from there, or maybe I'll see it somewhere else. But yeah, it all ties together. And when you, again, go find like-minded people in any hobby, it inspires you to keep going, because you're not weird. You're just like somebody else, and, you got somebody with something in common, and they enjoy it just as much as you do.
Yeah, absolutely. That's stated very well. And going back a little bit to your layout and the operations, one thing that always fascinates me about your layout, because I've been fortunate enough to have operated on your layout several times, and you have the 2x10 shelf, and then you have the corner piece, and then the 2x6 yard, but yet you have op sessions that last 2.5, 3 hours long with 4 operators. Tell me a little bit about that.
It's kind of funny when I start with my layout, and maybe it's small man syndrome or whatever you want to call it, but after each session, I feel better because of that, right? We've got these long op sessions, and, by design and whatnot. But, I look at these bigger railroads and I go, oh, man, I wish I would just a little bit longer, or if I wish I had a little bit more of this or that. And then you guys all come over, and we start at 7, and, it's 9:30, 9:45, 10 o'clock, and we're wrapping up trains. I'm like, what else do I need? Right. I keep these guys entertained. And we're able to incorporate a few things, and they're by design. When I was doing this railroad, I had that fear, right? We'll start at 7 o'clock, and by 7:45 we'll be up playing, Nintendo or something, right, or whatever, right? We'll have to find something more entertaining, or we'll have to run it 3 times just to make it feel right. But I sat so many hours on the stairs that overlook my railroad a bit, and I just sat there thinking about the operations, just the, how do I make this last longer? How do I, and then, what makes logistical sense? Okay. Trains are coming in from Canada. They're going to drop an interchange with P&W, and then they're going to take the cars from P&W back off that end. And then another train's going to come grab the empties that were in the yard, or what's going to Canada out of the yard, drop it here, there. I sat there and just, mimicked the whole thing for just hours, and, thought about what makes sense, what's going to make it longer. And then I wanted to incorporate some form of dispatching. And it may sound crazy to some that I've got a dispatcher for a railroad that's maybe 22 linear feet long.
Yep.
But I started to say, I wanted to have that element. I wanted to, especially for Don Iris, to keep him involved, because he's now in Florida, but enjoys the remote dispatching. But I didn't want to do CTC would be, you'd have the glare of one signal on the back of the other, it'd just be, yeah. So I said, well, how does the prototype do it? And they do it by track warrants. So well, let's give track warrants an audition here. So I did. And I set up mileposts and some station markers, and made up some names, and got that all set up so that there's spacing, and make it so my operator has to stay within. It's 10 feet, but what it really is supposed to be is about 50 feet. So how do I keep them within a certain area? And that's track warrants. So then, MP 25 is the middle of the bench. And from 25 north or from 25 south, you have to stay within that area. And that allows 2 operators to be working at the same time within that area without running into each other, and limits them. They can't drag an entire train across the 10-foot bench and try to switch it. They got to make smaller moves. shorter cuts, and it makes it last. And I don't seem to be getting too many complaints. I go through that emotional roller coaster, like I mentioned, like, maybe I should take advice from your book and just burn the thing. And then I go, down and go, this isn't too bad, and then you get an operating session over here. And I'm like, you know what, this is what I can do, knowing myself enough to know this is what I can manage right now. I've got other projects and other things that I do. And I still run the roller hockey league. I still have other hobbies that I enjoy. The rail photography being one of them too. This is what I can manage, and it makes and guys come over and they're fine. They're happy, and I'm a part of it. I've got a turn. Once a month. I've got guys that are showing up at my house to run trains. I think if it was too terrible, nobody would show up. They'd find excuses. They would organize their sock draw that night or do something, different, right? But they're coming over to run trains. Yeah. And I still have a dispatcher down in Florida who hangs with me. It's not easy because you're doing paper track warrants. And then there's this big block of nothing. I'm glad Don's got some streaming stuff he can watch in between, and he gets his bowl of popcorn out and he stays entertained because it's a long time in between. But these guys are all willing participants. And again, yet another reason why the Tri-State group is so cool. Because they're willing, they're not going to say, "Oh, this, nah." They're not like that. They understand what you're trying to accomplish, what you're trying to do, and they're more than willing to be a participant in it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, Ray. And I mean, as a frequent operator in your layout, it blows my mind too that a layout of this size keeps this many operators busy, and it's fun. It's engaging. You're working with other crews. There's a dispatcher. You're moving freight. And it's just the feeling, the ops scenario sequence, the ops session, it's really engaging and it's very entertaining. And I've told you a few times, we all show up. Every time you have an ops session, we all show up because we enjoy running on your railroad. And speaking of your railroad, a question I probably should have asked earlier is, what exactly is it that you model?
All right, so let's talk about it. The railroad is entitled the Providence and Worcester and New England Central Interchange Model Railroad. And I was an NECR guy. I mentioned that, in the beginning of the show. I was really big into NECR, but I moved here to Plainfield, and my house is right in between the Plainfield end of the Willimantic branch and right along the Norwich Main. As that comes together, used to be at a diamond. In Plainfield. Plainfield has a very rich railroading history, and it's really neat to see that. And being here, I've got the Norwich Main in my backyard. I've got the Willimantic branch in my front yard. It was hard not to do Providence and Worcester.
Sure.
So, you see it enough. They're your neighbors, and you kind of fall in love with them, and that's kind of what it is. So, but I still had a love and affair with the New England Central. I just loved the blue and gold, and I'm glad there's 2 locomotives still out there in that paint scheme. Only one still on the NECR, and my very favorite, the 3855s out in Connecticut Southern. But that's where I had to start. I had wanted to keep the NECR, keep the P&W. So as I'm putting this down, my railroads are very, they say use that term proto freelance. It's very freelance more than proto. The proto is the locomotives. The freelance is the rest of the railroad, up into 1 or 2 industries that are on there that are real industries. And I've kind of done my take of a very condensed Plainfield. There's a lot of track on my layout, and it's really meant to be 15, 20, 25 feet longer, but I've included the industries that I wanted to have on there. I picked up a building when Joe Grassetti took down his New York Central layout and made that into a beer distributor. And so that was kind of emulating New England Central used to bring Corona beer by rail car to F&F distributors in New London, Connecticut. So I kind of brought that idea, and I watched them switch that car. So I wanted beer distributor. And then paper mill. That actually came off of Mike Du Bois' layout when he took it down. So paper mill, which kind of represents International Paper up in Putnam. And then the only real Plainfield industries that I am emulating is vaporizer. Ice melt is bagged, comes out of Rochester, and they bag it here in Plainfield. And then there's East Coast Materials Management, who was, or maybe they're still doing it. I see some gaff shingles down there, but they were getting gaff shingles by boxcar and then distributing it out of there. I'm not sure if they're coming by boxcar again. I'm still trying to figure out what they're doing now, but my era locked there. It's a gaff distributor for shingles. So I'm bringing in high cubes. Shingles are going out there, and then they're being distributed from there, and empties are coming back out. And then the rest of the railroad is kind of the grain mill. Again, I had to have that. I named it after my daughters. And then we have 2 industries. We have a lumber yard. I named it after my grandfather, who was carpentry was a major hobby of his. And then Sunnybrook Industries, which just ended up being an extra building off of Mike Du Bois' layout. I live in an area that's called Sunnybrook. Therefore, Sunnybrook Industries, and you can just imagine what they're building in there. I don't know what. I haven't decided, but they're getting rolls of steel, and they're making some kind of product that they're shipping out. Up to you. You can decide what they're doing. I haven't figured it out yet, but anyway. And so that's kind of my railroad. It's a mocked up interchange between the New England Central and the Providence and Worcester, which they do. I just moved the interchange to Plainfield instead of being in Willimantic in the Willimantic yard. Now NECR comes from Willimantic up to Plainfield. Yeah, it's filled with an interchange, 2 interchange trains, and then a whole bunch of switching. And I divide that 10-foot bench, and then even the yard guy, he does sorting. There's some ghost trains out in the yard that came in overnight per se, and he's got to cut them up and sort them, and then switch out 2 industries on that bench. So there's a lot of fill. That's why we get that 2.5 to 3 hours. There's a lot going on in a short area, but we can definitely fill up that time with it.
Yeah. And exactly like you said, it does fill up the time, and it's highly enjoyable too. And some of the operations that I've noticed from my limited understanding of the NECR and PNW in this area is that your operation scheme kind of follows the prototype.
It does. Like I said, I've changed the locations, but the names and purpose may not have been. New England Central brings cars down from Canada, picking stuff up along the way. And I emulate that. The 608 job is a Palmer to Plainfield turn, not a Plainfield to Willimantic turn. But bringing product out of Canada. I did a lot of research, and it's not 100% accurate. And I certainly wouldn't want somebody to come and rivet count my commodities and where they're coming in and out. But I've done enough research to kind of sell it enough where it had to make some kind of sense, some purpose for the railroad, that products are being brought to a customer and they're being, something's being manufactured there. Not just, okay, move this car to here, to here, to here. I wanted a full purpose. It's why I chose car cards and waybills for my operation, because I put a lot of time into the waybill aspect of, the shingles. Where are they coming from? Where are they going? In figuring that out. I spent a lot of time on Google Maps. I'd look at factories and, lumber mills to see if they were rail served, to make sure that the locations I was using seemed to be accurate. And if I saw rail cars there, I said, okay, I can sell that. They're coming out of, whatever. They're coming out of Quebec, or they're coming out of British Columbia, or they're coming out of Montana or wherever else. I was able to try to sell all of that and make it work. Yeah.
And work it does. I mean, like I said, as a regular operator, the ops theme is very believable. I don't question it at all. It just flows very smoothly, and it really makes you feel like you're operating on the real thing. So I guess what's next for Ray Arnott, the modeler?
I gotta get you over to my layout here. We completed the mountain, Du Bois Mountain. That's in honor of Mike. We named the mountain after him. And after having some track issues and some problems, we've got that reclosed in. Now we got some dirt on it, but now it's time to put some forest floor down on it and get some trees on it and get some real scenery going. I'm hosting. I'm part of the Nutmeg division of the NMRA, and they're having a meeting pretty locally here in a couple of weeks. And I've volunteered. I never thought I'd do an open house for my layout, but wow, but then I was encouraged. I was like, I probably should share it with some people. And the Nutmeg group is a good group of guys. And I said, well, I'll have them over, and we'll open up the layout. So I'm getting ready for that as well, doing some cleaning up and getting it so that it can be shown. And I actually plan on operating the layout during it, having, not a full op session, not dispatched, but just having some guys over to run trains so that when people come over, they get the idea of what's going on. I mean, you can look at the railroad, but to see it working is a totally different thing. And I really got that suggestion from Kyle LeBlanc, and I thank him for it, that have guys come over and see trains moving is a huge thing, and they kind of figure it out. I think our group, the Tri-State Railroaders, and the way we operate, I just really enjoy it. And I love sharing it with other people, that the theory of it's not fast. It's not the longest cut of cars that you can get. It's enjoyable. It's the process. It's not the result. It's the process. That's the enjoyable part. Yeah. The result is you go home, because it's done, right? The process is the part where you're having the most fun, when the trains are running, when you're switching cars, that's what you want, and just make it last, make it enjoyable. And I'm glad I've got great operators that come over to my layout and understand my theory, and that we share that common theory of just slow down, run them slow, run them easy. Tony Donatelli, same way. Mark Herrick, same way. Mike King, same way. It's not a race. We'll enjoy it. Go slow. You're going through compression. You don't need to do 40 scale miles an hour. You're going through compression. You're going to get there fast anyway. So might as well slow it down and enjoy it. So we're in that like mind, and it's great to have guys like that. And I can't wait to share it with the Nutmeg group.
Yeah, that's a great thing that you're doing. You're opening up your layout to new people to share the hobby, to pay it forward, as people have done it, for you and many of us in the past. And that's just another great aspect of the hobby.
Absolutely.
All right, Ray. Well, we could easily sit here for another hour or two talking about trains, but we're getting short on time, so we're going to wrap it up. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Joe, great to be here, and love listening to the podcast, and appreciate having me here.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.